everyone, and welcome back to Artifact Archives. We are excited to be back, and we're glad that you liked the last video, but what we're going to do now is kind of something special. So for the next few weeks, we're actually going to be featuring artifacts that go along with an exhibit that we're building for this summer, because as you all know, the 250th is coming up, and so our feature exhibit for the 250th is going to be one that covers the most important and notable visits by United States presidents to Cheyenne and Cheyenne Frontier Days. So the next few weeks are going to be videos that feature a lot of our coolest artifacts, some of them loaned and some of them in our permanent collection, that will be featured in the exhibit. So with this video, we're going to start with the most recent visit that we're going to be covering in the exhibit, which is the 1990 visit of President George H.W. Bush. So George Bush Sr. So what he did was in 1990, he had a tour of some of the western states in his schedule. In 1990, he went to California first in July, and that was for the dedication of the Richard Nixon Library. And then he did other stops in California and then Montana and Idaho. And those were all for Republican fundraisers and to do campaign events for Republicans that were running in the midterms. And then the final stop in his tour was to visit Cheyenne, Wyoming. And the main reasons he did it was because, number one, he wanted to be here for a commemoration of the state's Centennial, which would have been on July 10th of 1990. So he came just 10 days after that. And July 20th that year was also the first day of Cheyenne Frontier Days. And he wanted to kind of be involved in that. He wanted to see the rodeo. It didn't work out that way, but he was at least able to be in a parade and be in the city on the first day. So what we have here is an assortment of artifacts that are tied to his visit on July 20th, 1990 to the city of Cheyenne. So where should we start? First off, let's start with this right here. So this is pretty cool. This is a shadow box that was made by Jerry and Kay Jessen. So Jerry Jessen was the general chairman of Cheyenne Frontier Days at the time, and he helped organize a lot of the logistics of the visit. And what they did was, because of that, he was allowed in all the VIP areas, all that sort of stuff for the visit, and they collected everything that was tied to their visit that they could find, and they put it in a commemorative shadow box, and they graciously donated it to our permanent collection about 5 years ago. So let's kind of go through everything that's in here, because there's a lot. So first off, we have commemorative stickers of Cheyenne Frontier Days at the time with the Arrowhead logo and of the Wyoming Centennial celebration. So they would have handed these out in 1990 to everybody. Then what we have is the assortment of personal items that they got. So first off, they have Jerry's invitation to the VIP section of the place at the Capitol building, the state Capitol building, where Bush did his speech. Because what he did for his visit was he flew in on Air Force One, then he did a parade downtown for a few blocks, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then he had a speech at the Capitol building, which was his main address of the event, on the west wing of the Capitol building on the outside. Then he did a visit to F.E. Warren, and then he actually went on a private fishing trip in Middle Crow Creek with Al Simpson, his personal friend and a senator at the time, and a couple of other people, and then he left Cheyenne, and he was here for a full day. But anyway, this right here is Jerry's personal invitation to the VIP section. So this got him on the stage at the Capitol building for the event. And with that, there's this magazine right here. This is a copy of First Monday. It was the National Republican Party magazine at the time. So it would talk about everything that Republicans were doing good in the country and highlight, tours and events that they were doing. And for the July edition, the visit to Cheyenne made the front cover. And so this is President Bush at the Capitol building, and Jerry Jessen is this guy right here. And so he got to sit right next to the president, which is very cool. Then, among the other things in the case, we have a photocopy page of the poster that was made for President Bush's visit to advertise it a few days before. We have an American flag. They handed these out at the event, and so this was waved by somebody, probably Jerry himself, at the event at the Capitol building for Bush's visit. And then we have a copy of a photo right here, which is, I believe, by Randy Wagner, and it shows them on stage, and you see the little corner of the presidential podium right there, and then Jerry Jessen, George Bush, and then Senator Al Simpson, all in a row right there. And then the other cool things that we have is we have a container of presidential M&Ms that Bush and his Secret Service agents would give out to people on these visits just as little knickknacks. So that's the box they would have come in. And then these little insignificant looking things right here are the remnants of a couple of the M&Ms. They had them mounted, but time was not kind to M&M pellets. So most of it is gone, but the little snippets of what's left is there. So those are presidential M&Ms, pretty cool. Then we have a lapel pin up here that, again, would have been something personal given by George Bush and his aides to dignitaries, VIPs that he met on these visits. So he gave Jerry this. And then the last thing in the shadow box is this personal letter from the White House to Jerry Jessen, thanking him for the visit, for making it so nice, and for his service in helping get things all figured out. Signed by George Bush. And so, yeah, so those were all of his personal items all together. They decided very fittingly to put it in a very nice looking shadow box. So that's pretty cool. Just a whole assortment of stuff. And speaking of that photocopy of a poster that was in the shadow box, this is pretty cool. We got an original, so we were very lucky. This just came in last year, and it came in with an amazing assortment of posters that this guy had just saved and rolled up. And a lot of them came in pretty nice shape, so we're very happy to have this. So here is what an original poster, this would be the size of it, and this is what it would look like. So Cheyenne welcomes President Bush, Friday, July 20th. Activities begin at noon. And you've got the parade on here, his speech at the Capitol building, and then they tied in the Cheyenne Frontier Days kickoff with it. And it should be important to note, and it's noted kind of on this poster, that this visit, when he decided to come to Cheyenne, because it was close to the Centennial, not quite on the Centennial, and it was the first day of Frontier Days, the Frontier Days General Committee and the Wyoming Centennial Committee kind of joined forces, and this was a joint event for them. So again, this was July 20th, so 10 days after the Centennial. So they were both involved in figuring out some of the logistics and all the little details of the visit and getting everything figured out for President Bush. So pretty cool there. Then what we have is a couple of newspapers from the day after Bush visited. So Wyoming Eagle, July 21st, 1990. So here we go. This is what the headline would have looked like. We have this in the permanent collection. So Bush delivers message to Wyoming, and then it talks about the weather, because that day it was just cloudy and rainy all day. It talks about what he's talking about in his speech at the time, so some cultural events he wanted to comment on, like protecting the U.S. flag from protest, desecration, prayer in schools, that sort of thing. And then just tons of other stuff, like info about what was going on for Frontier Days or what was about to happen that day. And then this next section here is kind of the midsection of the newspaper, and it features some of the photos by Fred Yates. He took all of these that were printed in the newspaper to kind of highlight Bush's visit. So I'll get it to cooperate here. So you've got one of these flags that was in the shadow box. This is one of them in use by a kid just holding it with his mouth. And then this is another kid and his mom wanting to take photos of the president, and that's how they were at the Capitol building. Very cute. And then another photo in the VIP section at the Capitol building. You can see how rainy it was kind of by the moisture built up on the bulletproof glass they had. And then you have Al Simpson in his raincoat right next to Bush, pointing things out to him, and just Bush taking it all in and enjoying it. So we've got that. And then before we get to the last item, I have some photos printed out here that kind of highlight a little bit more angles of what was going on. So all these photos were provided to us by the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library Museum. They're very good to work with, and they were very kind to us. So shout out to them. Thank you to them. But these are all from their collection. And so this right here is kind of an overview of how it looked at the Capitol building. And so the VIP section is right here, this stage. And this is the west side of the Capitol building. And there were thousands of people in the crowd to watch this. Well, because the president doesn't show up every day to Cheyenne, as the exhibit will tell you. But, I mean, they had a stage and they had kind of hay bales placed around it. And then they had the big signs for the Centennial and Cheyenne Frontier Days. And then behind and around George Bush on the stage sat, Wyoming's 2 senators at the time, one of them being Al Simpson. There are congressmen at the time, governor, and then the whole Cheyenne Frontier Days General Committee and the whole Wyoming Centennial Commission. So they were all up there. And so that's kind of the overview of everything. But then with that comes our last item. And this is a box. Now, you may be thinking, why am I showing you all just a wooden box, beat up, looks like junk? What's special about it? Why did you save it till the end of this video? Why are you doing this? But it is actually a very cool artifact. So what this box is during the process of getting everything set for the presidential exhibit, and when we were looking through the photos of Bush's visit that the Bush Library sent us, they sent us a couple of photos like this one of him in the parade, and he's in this 1930 Model A Ford pickup truck. And it kind of got me intrigued. I was like, I wonder where that truck is today, or kind of what the story is behind it. And so what happened was this truck was owned by a Cheyenne resident at the time, and they were looking, everybody in Bush's party at the White House was trying to look for ways to make the event in Cheyenne more noteworthy, look cooler, be more in touch with the history of the city, and just, showing off the history of the event. And so what they did was, instead of having him in his presidential limo, they thought, hey, how cool would it be if he was in this old pickup truck? And so that's what they did. But what's funny is, for the parade, and I found this through notes that his aides were taking in the White House that the Bush Library also provided us, they said that if the weather was bad, that they would switch back to the presidential limo. The weather was bad, and somehow, somewhere, someone convinced Bush to stay in the truck. And according to the stories I've been told, he was not happy about it. He did not like being in the rain in this truck. He wanted to be in the limousine where it was warm and nice. And the limousine back then had kind of a small section of a sunroof that he could pop out of and stand out of to wave to the crowds and everything. So he was hoping that he could go back to the limo. Didn't turn out to be the case. Somebody browbeat him into being like, come on, George, go in the truck. And so here's just more photos that I have very quickly. So that's him kind of going down Capitol Avenue in the truck. And then this guy with him was called Timberjack, and he had a dog named Tuffy with him. And from the stories I've heard, no one really knows how he got in the back of Bush's car. Apparently he was able to just talk his way through Secret Service, through the people organizing the parade and everything, being like, well, how cool would it be if there was a real life mountain man in the car with Bush? And so somehow he made it in there. I don't know how, but he did. And there's reports of the dog Tuffy like curling around Bush's legs and stuff as he was in the car. And Bush even made comments about it in the speech at the Capitol building that Timberjack was just hooping and hollering the whole way, acting as if he were president too, and that he got to listen to that for 3 blocks because the parade was 3 blocks. So cool stuff. But finally, back to this. This is a step stool that George Bush stood on in the back of the car during the parade. So his feet were right here in Cheyenne on July 20th, 1990. So the cool thing about this is I was telling you I got interested in the car. So I tried to start tracking down what happened to it. And I figured that it was owned by a guy in a car club in town. And it was. I contacted them and they remembered exactly who owned it. I tracked the guy down and his wife had moved up to Cody. And when I talked to her about the car, she was like, "Oh, I sold it." And I've been following that paper trail still to this recording of this video. But she was like, "I still have the step stool." And I was like, "The what?" And then she told the story to me, and they had the car and the step stool. And what happened was when they sold the car, they kept the stool. And right after July 20th, 1990, it actually became a footrest on their outdoor porch. And it was that way for about 30 years. So that's why it looks all weathered and beat up. But that's where it was. And I told her about what we were doing and that I'd been tracking the car and that the footstool's still pretty cool. And they were nice enough to donate it to us. So it's ours forever. So we got this hunk of wood with us here in the collection forever. Pretty cool story behind it for such an insignificant looking artifact, but there you go. So you got George Bush's step stool that he was in the back of his truck with, standing on, the newspapers, the poster, and the shadow box. And this will all be featured in the exhibit this summer. So pretty cool, and stay tuned for the other presidents and the other artifacts coming up because it gets even cooler than this, let me tell you. So see you next time.